I'm out of here, I barked as I headed for the door. Fine. Don't bother coming back, Erica fired back at me. Usually, I toss out a go to hell as I slammed the door behind me, but this time I held back. After 14 years of flinging the same insults, I wasn't planning to return. In a few days, she'd understand what made this different. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind. Erica had become a verbal wrecking ball, swinging hard with words that cut deep. I couldn't pinpoint when or why it started, but I'd begun avoiding her to keep things from exploding. Every day, I'd linger in the car a little longer. Sometimes, I wouldn't come home until after Erica and Morgan, our 13-year-old daughter, had already eaten dinner. There might be leftovers waiting, but lately those were becoming scarce too. Name's Brandon Kowalski, technically Alfred Brandon Kowalski. But with my dad also named Alfred, they called me Brandon from the get-go to avoid confusion. Not a junior, though. Dad is Alfred John Kowalski, and why he didn't name me Alfred Jr., I'll never know. I would have been fine with Junior or even DJ. Yes, I've got Polish roots, and I've heard nearly every Polish joke there is. Growing up in this town of 10,000, I've been the butt of most of them. Well, I'm half Polish. Mom's side is a mix of German, French, Irish, and English, but being a Kowalski, I get labeled as Polish. Erica, though, wasn't the woman I thought she was. I realized that about 4 weeks ago. I'd been steering clear of her toxic behavior, and then one Monday night, I went to grab a bite at a diner. Sitting there, waiting for my food, I couldn't help but overhear two guys in the next booth. They were talking about me, of all things. One guy asked, "How long have you been with the Pole's wife since they got married?" Heck, I even slept with her on their wedding day, and he's none the wiser. I didn't know the first voice, but the second hit me like a sledgehammer. It was my best friend, Derek Reed. I froze. They kept chatting, but my mind blanked until Derek added, "Yeah, we meet up at least twice a month." Brandon's so clueless. It's almost funny. Just then, the waitress came over. "Sorry, I've got to run," I muttered, bolting before they noticed me. I couldn't process it. Erica, my wife, with Derek, my best friend. The man who stood by me at the altar. He's also the guy who works on my cars. Not my official mechanic, but the only one I trust to service them. I run a used car lot, by the way. Yeah, a used car salesman. Heard all the jokes about that too, but my business is doing well because people know they're getting quality cars at a fair price, and if something goes wrong, I handle it. Derek's always been a great mechanic, and I keep him busy, paying him handsomely. I once asked him to join my staff, but he joked about not being able to respect himself working for a Pole. He laughed, but I knew there was some truth behind it. Still, I kept him as an independent contractor, though he relied solely on me for work. That dependency, it would be his downfall. Driving through town after leaving the diner, my mind raced. Was it true, or just him bragging? I could have hired a private investigator, but if their meetups were infrequent, it would cost me a fortune for nothing. So I decided to check Erica's phone and email instead. Back at home, she was acting normal, which made it harder to figure out. I needed proof before confronting her. Later that night, when she was asleep, I checked her email. Nothing suspicious. Her phone was locked, but I cracked it easily. Morgan's birth date. There were a few vague messages, but nothing from Derek. His name being there wasn't odd. He was my friend, after all. Maybe he was just talking big. But Erica's recent behavior made me think there might be someone else. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. It was after 2:43 a.m. when I finally drifted off. The next morning at the dealership, Derek cracked one of his usual Polish jokes. Normally, I'd shrug it off, but today I wasn't in the mood. "Derek, what do you really know about Poland? Bet you couldn't even find it on a map if you tried. You love making jokes, but I'm sure most Poles could find the US, maybe even our state. Now get back to work." Derek looked taken aback, speechless for once. He knew something was off. Derek's not the book-smart type. He's more hands-on, a guy who's good with engines but not great with academics. We'd been close since high school, when I helped him pass his classes. Now I was rethinking our entire friendship. I shut myself in my office, trying to figure out how to get proof. I couldn't just confront them. They'd deny everything without evidence. So I called a private investigator in Santa Fe and laid it all out for him. He told me it would be expensive to track them, given the irregularity of their meetings. You could install a tracker on her phone, he suggested. That way you'll know where she's going. Cameras might work too, but unless you get high-end ones, she'll probably notice. If I were you, I'd stick to tracking her phone and wait until you catch them in the act. He gave me advice without charging me. Consider this a freebie, he said. You can find all this stuff online anyway. Thanks, you've been a big help. Expect a check. I told him. If you're ever in Silver City, come by Kowalski Auto. I usually don't get out that way, but if I do, I'll be sure to drop by, he replied. He seemed genuine. A lot of my success in business came from making people feel valued. Everyone wants to feel important. So I downloaded the tracker, figuring it'd be cheaper and less of a hassle than setting up cameras that Erica might spot. That night, after everyone was asleep, I snuck up to Erica's phone and installed the app, syncing it with mine. She'd never know it was there. Finally, I slept well for the first time in days. The next day, I kept an eye on the tracker. Erica worked part-time at the university bookstore, pulling in 15 to 20 hours a week. She called her paycheck mad money, which she often splurged at the salon. She hit the grocery store and came back home. Derek, meanwhile, was home for most of the day, working on cars while Erica was out. At least for that day, nothing suspicious. That night, I tried to be more civil, suggesting we all go out for dinner. Erica seemed open to it, while Morgan, being a typical teen, wasn't thrilled, but I insisted. Dinner went off without a hitch, but when I brought up Derek's name, Erica shifted uncomfortably and quickly changed the subject. That only deepened my suspicions. Something was off, and I needed to figure out if Derek was telling the truth. That night, I didn't bother checking her phone. Whenever I peeked at her texts or calls, I came up empty. Either she was erasing them fast, or she wasn't making any at all. As I climbed into bed, I thanked Erica. "Thanks for coming to dinner tonight," I said, looking her in the eye. "Thank you, Brandon. It was nice," she replied, holding my gaze. "You might be in luck tonight. It's been a while, and we've been at odds lately." After her usual bathroom routine, she climbed into bed beside me. I felt torn. If she was cheating, did I even want to be intimate? I decided to let her make the first move. Until I had solid proof, I wouldn't initiate anything. We did end up sleeping together, but it was nothing remarkable. Still, at least I got something out of it. Over the next week, I monitored her phone but found nothing unusual. By Saturday night, I convinced myself Derek was full of it, just trying to impress someone with his exaggerated stories. He'd been known to do that since high school, but still I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling. I went downstairs for a drink, hoping it would relax me. With a Jack Daniels and Coke in one hand and her phone in the other, I decided to give it one more check. Entering Morgan's birth date as the password, I unlocked her phone. That's when it hit me, like a bolt of lightning. Out of nowhere, the truth slammed into me. Morgan had been born exactly 9 months after our wedding day. People like to call babies born under those circumstances wedding night babies, since they're usually conceived during the honeymoon or right after. But if what Derek had said was true, there was a very real chance Erica had already been pregnant when we walked down the aisle. Sure, she'd been on the pill, but we hadn't exactly waited until marriage to get physical. In fact, it had been a significant part of our relationship from early on. The doctor once explained that the stress of the wedding could have messed with her hormones, making the birth control less effective. If the pills didn't work that night, then they probably hadn't worked the day before either. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The odds were a coin flip. There was a 50-50 chance that Morgan wasn't mine. Ever heard that saying, "The early bird gets the worm"? Well, in Derek's twisted version of things, he was the early worm that snagged the bird. Without thinking, I got off the couch and headed straight to the bathroom, my mind set on getting proof. In the cabinet, I found some cotton swabs. Morgan was sound asleep in her room, finally at peace after years of restless nights. She was sprawled out, snoring softly, her mouth hanging open. It didn't take much to gently swab the inside of her cheek with a Q-tip. She didn't even stir. After sealing her sample in a plastic bag, I swabbed the inside of my own cheek and sealed it up the same way. Even if the results came back saying Morgan was my biological daughter, it wouldn't erase the bigger issue, Erica's betrayal. If she had cheated, the damage was already done. But I shoved that thought aside for now. Sunday came, and as usual, we each stuck to our tasks. I spent most of the day avoiding Erica and Morgan, keeping my emotions bottled up. I felt like I was teetering on the edge, caught between wanting answers and fearing what I might discover. "Is something on your mind, Brandon?" Erica asked, sensing the tension. I couldn't exactly tell her the truth, so I made up something quick. "Just planning to buy some cars at the next auction to keep the lot stocked. Things might get tight until I make some sales." "Don't overdo it," she said, casually reminding me to be careful with our money. She always liked to talk about the business as if it was a shared venture, but the reality was it was mine. I'd set it up in a way that kept it separate from our personal finances, especially since we lived in a town where everyone watched each other's moves. Last thing I needed was for my business life to spill over into my private one. "I'm thinking about paying off the credit cards and keeping just one open to help with our credit score," I added, throwing out the idea to cover my real plan. "Do whatever you think is best," she replied, not giving it much thought. Then, like a light bulb flickering on, an idea hit me. If my suspicions turned out to be true, this move would protect me in more ways than one. So, early Monday morning, I grabbed the DNA samples and headed to Western New Mexico University. After talking with someone in the science department, I was directed to the department head. He seemed eager to help. I handed him a few of my business cards and sweetened the deal by offering a 10% discount on any car work they might need in the future. He seemed pleased with the offer. "I've been thinking of getting a new car to replace my Camry," he mentioned. "Maybe I'll swing by your lot sometime. If nothing catches my eye, I'll have you find something for me." "Sounds great. Let me know what you're looking for, and I'll make it happen," I replied. As I walked out of the university, I forced a smile, though I was anything but at ease. I knew that whatever the test results showed could change everything. That whole conversation with Erica about buying cars had just been a smokescreen for what was really going on in my head. But now, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe I really would stock up at the auction. Back at the office, I called Shane, my accountant, and told him about my plan. "We'll make this work," I said confidently, though doubt gnawed at me. "There's one more thing, Shane," I added after a pause. "I want to pay off the mortgage on the house. Can you run the numbers and see if we can make a lump sum payment? Let me work on it and get back to you after lunch," he said before heading out. When Shane left, I toyed with the idea of calling my lawyer to get some advice on family law, but I stopped myself. There was no point in rushing things. I needed solid evidence first. After lunch, Shane came back with the numbers, and we mapped out the next steps. But the next couple of days were excruciating. Every hour dragged by as I waited for the DNA results. Then, late Wednesday evening, the call came. The department head confirmed the results and arranged to stop by to discuss cars. When he arrived at my office, I could see from his expression that it wasn't good news. "The samples don't match," he said plainly. I nodded, the confirmation hitting me harder than I expected, even though I'd been bracing myself. He handed me the envelope with the results inside, and I glanced at it briefly before changing the subject. "So, about that car you were interested in?" I asked. "Yeah, I know it's a bit of a cliché, but I just hit 50, and I'm thinking about getting a sports car," he replied with a chuckle. "How about a Mazda Miata?" I suggested. Though I didn't have one in stock, I promised to check the auction the next day and find a good one. "I'll give you a call this afternoon with an update," I assured him as he left. That night, I had already told Erica I might leave early the next morning, but I didn't expect her to care. She rarely needed me for anything anyway. She handled most things herself. As I drove around town, everything felt surreal, like I was looking at my life from the outside. I called my lawyer, who expressed sympathy but referred me to a family law expert he trusted. I set up a meeting for the following evening. Later, over a quiet meal at a local diner, I let my mind wander. Had I really thrown away the last 15 years of my life? And for what? I didn't even have a child to show for it. Morgan, as much as I cared for her, wasn't mine. I couldn't pretend anymore. I had known something was wrong before, but now that I had proof, there was no going back. One thing was clear: Derek was going to pay for what he'd done. It didn't matter that he'd been my best friend for years. After this, I'd rather have an enemy. As for Erica, she'd face her reckoning too. Had she known all along that Morgan wasn't mine? Even if she hadn't, she'd still hidden the truth of her affair with Derek, my best man, on our wedding day. Now I had no doubt she'd been sneaking around with him, meeting up at least twice a month. Rage boiled inside me, and I knew I needed to get away before I did something I'd regret. I picked up the phone and called Erica. "Hey, I won't be home tonight," I told her. "I'm staying in Albuquerque to prep for the auction tomorrow." "Well, have a safe trip," she responded, her tone flat. It wasn't typical for me to head to Albuquerque for auctions, so this was out of the ordinary. I wondered if she'd use my absence as an opportunity. She'd have to figure out how to explain it to Morgan and my parents, which wouldn't be easy. But I kept the tracker on her phone so I could check on her movements throughout the night. Driving to Albuquerque, I had one thing on my mind: buying at least 20 cars, including a Miata. I'd already arranged for their pickup and delivery to my lot after the auction. But there was one question left: who was I going to trust to inspect them? It wouldn't be Derek, that was for sure. Once he finished the work he still had lined up, I'd cut him off completely. He probably thought he'd get a nice payday from my new purchases, but he wouldn't see a dime from me. I decided to keep everything under wraps until the very last minute. First, I needed to talk to a local auction dealer, someone who could recommend a reliable mechanic to inspect the cars before they were shipped to our small town. By the time I arrived in Albuquerque, it was around 9 a.m. I checked into a Best Western, nothing fancy, but comfortable enough. Even though I owned my own business, I couldn't justify using company funds to stay somewhere luxurious. The room was fine, the bed was good enough, and that's all I really needed. I've always been a simple guy, satisfied with simple things. As soon as I got settled, I checked the tracker on Erica's phone. She was still at home, or at least her phone was. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I couldn't shake the thoughts swirling around in my mind. Why had she done it? How could she justify betraying me on our wedding day and continuing the affair all these years? I started picking apart our marriage, questioning everything. It had never been perfect, of course, what marriage is. But I used to believe in our commitment, our bond. Now, I realized that had been a mistake from the start. In those early years after we got married, nothing was smooth. We hadn't planned on having a baby right away. The idea was to wait a few years before starting a family. We even talked about having 3 kids before we tied the knot. But when Morgan came along, all of that went out the window. And now, knowing Derek had been the cause of that disruption made everything feel pointless. 14 years of effort down the drain. The good times we'd had together were now completely overshadowed by this betrayal. If Erica hadn't been involved with Derek, maybe we would have had kids together. Maybe her pregnancy wouldn't have been so difficult, and we wouldn't have had such a rough time raising Morgan, which might have led her to want more children. Derek had completely upended my life when he slept with my future wife on the day I married her. And now he was still sneaking around with her twice a month, probably laughing at me behind my back. Couldn't let him get away with it. Lying there in the dark, anger started bubbling up again. I knew I needed to get control of myself or I'd never sleep. So, I turned on the TV and flipped to a mindless comedy show. Laughter helped, easing the tension a little. By 11:30, I finally felt myself relax, ready to sleep. Tomorrow would be a busy day. The auction went off without a hitch. I managed to pick up some great cars at solid prices and even connected with some dealers in the Albuquerque area. It was a good distraction from everything going on back home. While there weren't any Miatas available at the auction itself, I reached out to a couple of dealers who each had one red, the other black. We started working out deals, pending my client's color preference. Both dealers assured me they'd finalize the transactions as soon as I let them know. Looking at the cars I had just acquired, I realized I should have been attending this auction more often. Rubbing elbows with fellow business owners gave me some fresh ideas about expanding my operations. It also gave me a much-needed break from the personal chaos swirling around in my life. Later that afternoon, I met with my lawyer, and the news wasn't great. If I went through with a divorce, I'd be looking at losing half my assets, plus paying alimony and child support, for a kid who wasn't even biologically mine. That's when I made up my mind not to file for divorce, at least not yet. Instead, I'd pay off the mortgage on the house and leave Erica there with Derek's kid. She'd stay, but since the mortgage was in my name alone, she wouldn't be able to sell the place. As long as I kept up with the taxes and utilities, she couldn't legally force me out, and she wouldn't have the option to walk away with everything. However, I still had to figure out what to do about my business. Even though it was protected as a corporation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something could go wrong without the right legal steps. My next priority was getting in touch with my business lawyer. After a long, exhausting day, I finally made it home. I didn't have much left in me. I'm wiped out. I think I'm just going to shower and crash. I mumbled to Erica as I headed toward the bedroom. "Do you want some dinner?" she asked, her voice neutral. "No, I had a late lunch," I replied, barely looking at her. At least she'd thought to ask. That shower felt like a blessing, like it washed away the stress and frustration that had been building up for days. Sure, the problems were still there, but for a moment I had some peace. As soon as my head hit the pillow, sleep found me. After a week of nonstop tension, having a plan in place made me feel like I could breathe again. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling refreshed for the first time in a while. I headed to the office before Erica and Morgan even stirred. Surrounded by financial reports and spreadsheets, I started mapping out my next moves. I called Shane and filled him in on the 23 cars I had just bought. I also instructed Lindsay to stop assigning any more work to Derek and to keep that decision quiet. She raised an eyebrow. "You're the boss," she said, a bit curious but not pushing the issue. "Thanks, Lindsay. I couldn't do this without you," I replied, meaning it. By 9 a.m., I was on the phone with my business lawyer. He wasn't optimistic. "Your business is technically protected, but she could still push for a sale to get half of its value. Have you considered selling it preemptively?" he suggested. "I can't do that. This business is my life," I shot back. "Let me think it over and get back to you by the end of the week." That conversation stung. I put my heart and soul into building this business. It felt like raising a child, something I'd actually built from the ground up, unlike Morgan, who wasn't even mine. The anger threatened to rise again, but I've been in business long enough to know how to compartmentalize my emotions. I forced myself to focus on the business at hand. My first call was to Tyler, a client who had confirmed some things about Derek. "Tyler, it's Brandon Kowalski. I've got some intel on two Miatas, one red, one black. You still interested?" "If the price is right," he replied. "Which color do you prefer? I can show you both and we'll work out the numbers after. Even if we don't agree, I'll have no trouble selling them," I reassured him. "What's your preference?" he asked. "Red makes a statement, but it fades quicker. Black's classy, but it gets hot fast in this area. Are you planning to keep it in a garage?" "Yeah, I'll be garaging it," he confirmed. "All right, red it is. When do you want to meet? Monday or Tuesday?" "Perfect. Give me a call when you're on your way," I said, finalizing the deal. Once I hung up, I called the dealer with the red Miata to lock down the swap. He was interested in a BMW that had been sitting on my lot for a few months, figuring it'd have better luck in a bigger city. We worked out the details. Meanwhile, Derek showed up with a few cars still waiting for repairs. His flexibility as an independent contractor had worked in my favor for a long time, but now just being around him made my blood boil. As I heard one of my salesmen mention the arrival of the 23 cars, Derek walked over, curious. "Hey, Brandon, when are those cars from the auction getting here? I need to plan out my repairs," he asked. "The auction house will handle delivery. Should be late next week or early the following one," I said, keeping my tone as flat as possible, fighting the urge to confront him right then and there. I let out a small chuckle as Derek walked away, though the anger still boiled just beneath the surface. That weekend, I kept my distance from Erica, filling my time with yard work and running errands. I no longer bothered checking the tracker on her phone. It didn't matter anymore. All that was left for her was my contempt. Raising another man's child felt like the ultimate betrayal, something I couldn't forgive. By Monday, I was back at the car show. I arranged the trade for the BMW in exchange for the Miata and headed to Albuquerque to finalize the deal. "We'll grab lunch when you get here," the dealer offered. Before leaving, I let Lindsay know I'd be out for the day. "Hold the fort while I'm gone," I told her. "Got it, boss," she said confidently. Her dependability never wavered. She definitely deserved a raise. The drive to Albuquerque was pleasant, and so was the lunch, which helped solidify a budding camaraderie with the dealer. On my way back, driving the Miata with the wind whipping through my hair, I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Spontaneously, I decided to go ahead and get myself a black Miata too. I realized that with everything happening, I didn't need more than a two-seater anymore. When I pulled up to the house in that fiery red Miata, Erica peeked through the window and whispered something to Morgan. Both of them stepped outside to see what I was up to. "Why do we need this car?" "We need something with a back seat for Morgan," Erica said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I just picked it up for a client in Albuquerque. Thought you might want to go for a spin," I replied, keeping my voice light. "No thanks, I'm not really into small cars," Erica retorted, her disdain barely concealed. "Morgan," I called out, motioning for her to join us. "No way, Dad," she shot back. "I get teased enough for having a Polish used car salesman for a dad. I don't need to make it worse." Her words hit harder than I expected. Sure, it was typical teenage bluntness, but it still stung. I glanced over at Erica, expecting some kind of reaction, but she brushed it off as if it were nothing. Now both of them, my wife and daughter, were treating me with disrespect. Maybe that's how teenagers are, but Morgan's jab made me wonder about the authenticity of my family life. "I'm going for a drive," I said, my frustration rising. "I'll be back later." I shifted the car into reverse and took off, the tension too thick to stay around. I drove the streets of Silver City, trying to calm down. By the time I got home around 9:30, I was still frustrated. I went straight upstairs, took a quick shower, and crawled into bed, not bothering to interact with anyone. A few minutes later, Erica came into the room, flipping on the light and aiming it directly at my face. I squinted and squeezed my eyes shut tighter. "Are you seriously sulking because we didn't choose a sports car?" she asked, her voice full of mockery. "Aren't you going to spend time with your family? You're not just Polish, you're childish." Her sudden change in attitude threw me off. I had a hunch that Derek's influence was behind her growing disdain for my heritage, and now it was bleeding into our daughter's behavior. But of course, Morgan wasn't even my child, despite all the support I had given her. I needed to accept that hard truth. "It seems like you and your daughter would prefer life without a Pole around," I said coldly. "Maybe it's best if I just leave." Erica's smug expression only fanned the flames of my anger. She'd regret the way she treated me. From that point on, the atmosphere in the Kowalski household became cold and silent. The next day, I called Tyler, who came by to check out the Miata. He loved it. We ran the numbers, and he was thrilled to get such a great deal, $3,000 below Kelley Blue Book value. As we wrapped up, he mentioned, "Hey, my best friend handles purchasing for the university, and they rotate about 16 cars every 2 years. It's not a huge deal, but maybe you could talk to him. I'm always happy to do business." "I'll make sure he gets a good deal," I said. "I'll have Ethan reach out to you by the end of the week," Tyler said. "That's how I built my business," I thought to myself. Treating people right and valuing their referrals had always been the key to my success. By Wednesday, my lawyer gave me a call. "Hey, Brandon, I think I've got a solution to your issue. Can you stop by this afternoon to go over it?" "Absolutely. I'm ready to move forward," I replied. The tension at home had reached its breaking point, and I needed a way out. The meeting with my lawyer went well. The plan was solid, but it would take about 2 weeks to fully execute. Still, it would be worth the wait. Over the next couple of weeks, I began moving my personal things out of the house. Bit by bit, I transferred tools and other items to an apartment I had rented nearby. On the weekends, I kept myself busy with yard work and secretly cleared out my closet and drawers when Erica and Morgan weren't around. Since Erica handled laundry during the week, she hadn't yet noticed the growing emptiness in my closet. And that brings us to that Monday night when I finally told Erica, "I'm leaving." She fell back into her pattern of throwing insults my way, mocking me for being Polish and for my career as a used car salesman. In the past, when my anger reached its peak, I'd leave for a night or two, cooling off in a motel. But this time was different. This time it was final. The next morning, I got to the lot early and gathered my team for our usual weekly meeting. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. "Morning, everyone," I began. "As you all know, the cars I bought a couple of weeks ago arrived yesterday. They've been inspected and prepped, and they're ready to go on sale. We won't be using Derek for any more work moving forward. If he asks, just let him know we're going in a different direction. You've all been fantastic. You're like family to me. So this next part is hard to say." I paused, wiping away a tear. "I've sold the business." The room went quiet. They were shocked but didn't react much beyond that. No one's role would change except for Lindsay, who would take on some of my responsibilities and get a raise to match. Despite the surprise, they quickly congratulated her, recognizing the hard work she'd put in over the years. "Lindsay, please see me after the meeting. There's a lot we need to go over," I said. "I'll still be involved with the business in an advisory role. I may help with sales from time to time, but I won't interfere with your work. I trust all of you to keep things running smoothly," I assured them. The relief in the room was obvious. As the meeting ended, Derek appeared. "Hey, why wasn't I invited to the meeting?" he asked, clearly confused. "Because it was for staff only," I said, my tone firm. "And you're not an employee." Derek looked taken aback. "I see the cars have arrived. I'll start getting to work on them." "No need," I replied, keeping my tone cold and direct. "They've already been prepped for sale." "But I always check the cars," he argued. "Derek, I've sold the business. The new owner is going in a different direction," I explained, holding back the rage bubbling inside. I wasn't about to unload everything on him. "Not yet." "I can't believe you sold it," he muttered, clearly upset. "What now?" "You can pick up your check for the last 2 weeks. It's not much. Lindsay didn't send much work your way," I said bluntly. He had been counting on more work, but it wasn't coming. I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. I only wished I could tell him exactly what I thought. After the meeting, I spoke privately with Lindsay. "Keep this conversation between us," I instructed. "Of course, Brandon. I won't say a word," she promised. "Here's the plan," I continued. "I've set up companies in Nevada. One owns the lot, and the other owns the business. I own all the shares in both. Eventually, I'm going to divorce Erica, and I don't want her getting the business." "Why?" Lindsay asked, her concern evident. "I've moved out. Erica doesn't know yet, but I'm not going back. She's been having an affair with Derek and Morgan. Well, I suspect she's Derek's daughter, not mine. I'm not sure if Erica knows or if Derek knows, but they'll both find out soon enough. I'm not filing for divorce just yet, but I'll keep paying the utilities and taxes so Erica can't accuse me of abandonment and take everything. If she files, I'll make sure she doesn't get the business. That's why I've structured it the way I have. By the time she figures it out, it'll be too late. The money will be gone. And between you and me, I'm hardly making anything now. Just consulting and a few commissions. I trust you to manage the day-to-day. I'll be here if you need anything, but I know you can handle it," I explained. Lindsay smiled at the news of her promotion, but when I told her about Erica and Derek, her face turned serious. She was someone I had always held in high regard. Smart, trustworthy, and someone I could depend on no matter what. "I've got one last task for you before I head out," I said. "I want you to order a new sign and some letterhead. We're changing the name of the business to Helpless Car. It'll drive home the point to both Derek and Erica that the place is under new ownership." She raised her eyebrows, clearly confused. "Helpless Car? What's the story behind that? I'll explain the reasoning later. Just trust me for now. It's part of the whole picture, I replied. Although she seemed unsure, she nodded and agreed without hesitation, knowing I had my reasons. With that handled, I said my farewells to the team and got into my Audi, heading out on the road toward Albuquerque. A couple of hours in, my phone started buzzing. It was Erica. I wasn't surprised she called so soon. It was part of the cycle. I'd leave, she'd call, we'd talk things out, and eventually, I'd come back. Then things would return to normal for a little while anyway, until we circled back to the same old arguments. But this time was different. I decided to answer, more curious than anything to hear what she had to say this time. Hello, I greeted her, letting the speakerphone handle it while I drove. Brandon, what's going on? She asked, her voice sounding unsure. Not much, just driving to Albuquerque, I replied, my tone flat. What are you doing there? She pressed. I'm picking up a car, I said casually, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. So what I heard wasn't true then? She asked tentatively, testing the waters. What exactly did you hear? I asked, playing along. Derek called me. He said you sold the business, she admitted. I paused for a second before replying. Why would Derek call you? He's your best friend. He thought I might know something, she quickly covered. I fought back the bitterness that rose in my chest. Best friend, I thought. What a joke. But I kept my tone calm. Yeah, I sold it. I imagine you're relieved now. You don't have to worry about being married to a used car salesman anymore. Shouldn't we have talked about this first? She asked, her voice sounding more anxious. This was my business long before we ever got married, Erica. I didn't need your permission to sell it. I just hope the new owner treats the employees well, I said, keeping my tone firm and final. Did you at least get a good price for it? She asked, clearly concerned about her financial future. It wasn't about the money, I thought to myself. I just needed to move on, I said aloud. I'll take some time off and figure out my next steps. What about the mortgage? She asked, her voice now edged with panic. I paid off the house. All you'll need to handle now are the utilities and property taxes, I said, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction at her unease. What about food, gas, insurance? She continued, her voice rising. I must have overlooked those details, I said, pretending to be indifferent. Maybe you should think about working more hours, I added, barely hiding my sarcasm. When are you coming back? She asked, the desperation creeping into her tone now. I'm not, I replied almost nonchalantly, like it was the most ordinary thing to say. There was a heavy silence on the other end before she finally spoke again, her voice trembling. Brandon, please don't do this. You have to come back. I don't think so, I responded, emotionless. Brandon, please, she begged, her voice pleading now, nearly cracking with emotion. I've already made my choice, I said, with no feeling behind the words. What about your daughter? She asked, using Morgan as a last-ditch effort to pull at my heartstrings. You mean Morgan? The girl who's embarrassed of her last name and the fact that her father is, or was, a used car salesman, I said, bitterness lacing my words. Brandon, she's just a teenager. You can't take what she says to heart, Erica tried to reason. Well, none of that matters anymore. I won't be around to embarrass you or anyone else, I replied coolly. And with that, I ended the call and powered off my phone, letting her sit with the reality. I knew she'd try calling me again, but I had no interest in talking further. Once I'd cooled down, I settled into the drive, turning my attention back to the open road. I figured her next move would be to call Derek, share what I'd said, and try to figure things out between them. When I reached my destination in Albuquerque, I turned my phone back on and saw the flood of missed messages. 3 from Erica, 1 from Derek, and 1 from Lindsay. I dialed Lindsay back. Hey Lindsay, sorry I had my phone off for a while. I've been avoiding a few calls, I explained. No problem. Just wanted to let you know, your wife and Derek both called me. They wanted to know where you were. I told them you don't own the business anymore, so there's no reason for them to expect you back. Hope everything's all right on your end, she said. Perfect. Thanks, Lindsay. If they start bothering you, just tell them you'll file harassment charges. I joked. She laughed. I like the sound of that. I know it might feel like you've lost a lot, but trust me, you've got family here. We're your family, and we always will be, she said warmly. Thank you, Lindsay. You always know what to say. I hope your husband appreciates just how lucky he is, I replied with sincerity. Oh, he tells me all the time. It's something I never take for granted, she said. I won't either, I promised her. After hanging up, I considered calling Erica or Derek back. But then I thought, why give them the satisfaction? Let them wonder. With that settled, I stepped out of the car and walked into the auction dealer's office. I've got that Audi we talked about. Want to go over the details? He asked. Let's take a look, I said. He carefully inspected the car inside and out, even popping the hood to check things under the surface. I could flip this car in no time. Are you sure you want to make this trade? Feels like I'm getting the better deal, he remarked. You can pay me back later. I'm just looking for a good sports car, I assured him. 30 minutes later, I was back on the road, the top down, enjoying the wind on my face. I didn't have a destination in mind, so I headed north towards Santa Fe. Over the next couple of weeks, I wandered through northern New Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, and even Colorado. I stayed in touch with Lindsay in case she needed me, but I kept far away from Silver City. I called in to check on Lindsay a few times. When things finally settled down, I started drifting further west. Erica and Derek kept trying to contact me. At first, angry messages, then apologies, and finally, attempts at guilt trips. I listened, but their words meant nothing to me anymore. When they complained about the credit card I'd canceled, I couldn't help but laugh. Derek even called, accusing me of abandoning Erica and Morgan. That got another chuckle. Then my lawyer texted me. Erica had apparently threatened legal action if I didn't come back. So I called him. Hey, Brandon here. Did Erica really threaten you with legal action? Yeah, but as long as you're still covering the house, she won't have a case. There's no proof of abandonment, he reassured me. I've got something even better, I said. I recorded myself telling her I was leaving, and she insisted that I stay away. Should be useful. Send it over. If she causes trouble, I'll pass it on to her lawyer, he said. Will do. I'll check in next week to see how it's all going, I replied. Over the next few months, I cruised through the Southwest, racking up miles on the Miata. It wasn't the comfiest ride, but the freedom was worth it. I caught a few interested glances from women here and there, but I wasn't looking for that. I was still technically married after all. I drove to Reno, then Lake Tahoe, and took the scenic route along the California coast. I zigzagged through Napa Valley and down Highway 1, stopping in Yosemite, San Diego, and Death Valley, before hitting Las Vegas and Phoenix. I wasn't in a rush, just enjoying the open road. I struck up conversations with people in parking lots, some of them envious of a guy who could just hit the road without a care in the world. After 3 months and about 8,000 miles, I figured it was time to head back to Silver City. When I pulled into Helpless Auto, the whole team welcomed me back, including a few new faces. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to see me again. I walked into Lindsay's office, my old office, and her smile grew wider the moment she spotted me. She stood up, came around the desk, and gave me a tight hug. After catching up for a bit, I asked, how about we take the team out for some food and drinks at Wrangler's? Can you close up by 5? It was already past 3. Absolutely. I'll make sure everyone's ready. The whole crew will be there, she said, excitement clear in her voice. After letting the team know about the evening plans, I left the office feeling lighter than I had in a long time. After catching up with Lindsay, I made my way to my lawyer's office. He had been keeping me in the loop during my time on the road, letting me know that Erica had tried to claim abandonment and go after my assets. Thankfully, he managed to block her attempts. We sat down to talk strategy, preparing for whatever legal moves she might throw our way. Later, at 5 o'clock, I joined the team at Wrangler's for a celebratory dinner. The meal was fantastic, and it felt great reconnecting with everyone. As the night wound down and the team gradually started to leave, It was just me and Lindsay sitting at the table. She looked at me thoughtfully before saying, "Brandon, you might think you're lost, like you've lost control over everything. But that's not true. You trusted the wrong people, but you're not powerless." I looked back at her and asked, "So, you figured it out?" She nodded. "Yeah, it took me a while, but when you mentioned the new name and how it tells the whole story, it finally clicked. The jokes, your background, none of it really defines you. It's just noise." I smiled, genuinely touched. "Thank you, Lindsay. You're the reason I came back. I needed to see how you'd handled things in my absence. And I have to say, you've done more than just fill my shoes. You've made your own mark." "I had an excellent mentor," she said with gratitude in her eyes. We shared a warm hug before she left to meet her husband, who always seemed genuinely proud of her. Afterward, I drove back to the apartment I hadn't visited in months. The place felt stuffy, so I cracked open the windows to let in the cool evening breeze. I grabbed a cold beer from the fridge and stepped out onto the terrace, watching as people swam in the pool below while a nearby family enjoyed their evening together. As I sipped my drink, my thoughts drifted back to Erica and me. We used to have such big dreams when we first got married, but now those dreams seemed like distant memories long gone. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 8:30. A realization hit me. It was time for the confrontation I had been avoiding for too long. I finished my beer, grabbed my car keys, and headed for the Miata. The drive to my house, the house I had bought before Erica and I got married, felt oddly quiet. Technically, it was still mine since my name was the only one on the deed. When I pulled into the driveway, disappointment settled in. The yard was a mess, overgrown and neglected. The porch light flickered, and I could tell from the dim glow inside that Erica was home. I approached the door and knocked. After a moment, Morgan opened the door, her eyes widening in shock. "Dad?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Hi, Morgan. Is your mom home?" I asked, trying to keep my tone as neutral as possible. Morgan stammered a bit before shouting over her shoulder, "Mom!" From the kitchen, I heard Erica's voice, tense and shrill. "What is it?" Morgan kept staring at me before calling out, "Dad's here." Erica appeared around the corner, spotting me, and immediately snapped, "What the hell are you doing here?" I kept my cool and responded calmly, "Just passing through," I said, glancing around the familiar living room. Just then, Derek appeared from the bedroom, shirtless and still in his boxers. "Well," I said dryly, "the whole family's here. Mom, Dad, and well, you know." "What are you talking about?" Erica snapped, her face flushing with anger. "Well, it looks like Derek here has stepped into my role. It makes sense, I guess. He was always meant for it," I replied, sarcasm dripping from my words. Erica looked puzzled, while Morgan's expression shifted to one of irritation. "What are you even saying, Dad?" she asked, visibly annoyed. "Actually, sweetheart, you're a little confused," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Derek never worked for me. That was his decision. And by the way, I've been paying the utilities and the car insurance, so there's no issue with that." Erica interrupted. "What about groceries? Gas? You used to cover those. Did you lose your job or something while you were gone?" She was getting angrier, her voice growing louder, and I could see where this was heading. "No, Erica," I replied coolly. "I'm not here to take over. I'm just letting you and your partner know that you'll need to find somewhere else to live. You've got until the end of next month." Erica crossed her arms, defiant. "I'm not leaving. This is my home now." "Actually, you're mistaken," I said, letting the frustration seep into my voice. "This house was mine before we got married, and the deed is in my name. Legally, it's still mine. I'll give you some time to pack up and find a new place, but I expect you and your daughter to be gone by the end of next month." "What do you mean, your daughter?" "She's our daughter," Erica fired back, her voice brimming with indignation. "You're half right," I said with a dark chuckle. "She's yours." Confusion spread across Erica's face as she looked back and forth between me and Morgan. I took a deep breath, knowing it was time to drop the bombshell. "Morgan, I know you hate being called Polish, so here's some news. I'm not your father. Derek is. The room fell completely silent. Erica's face turned ashen, and she whispered, "What? That's right, Erica." I continued, my voice edged with bitterness. "You were careless on our wedding day, and it resulted in a child. But hey, it's good news for you, Morgan. You can take your real father's last name and become Morgan Reed. Maybe your mom named you after her lover out of respect." I glanced at Derek and Erica as they exchanged panicked looks, both of them clearly in shock. Derek's face had drained of all color. "Well, Derek," I said, savoring the moment, "it's time to step up and be a father. You've got 4 more years before college. I'm sure you can handle it." Both Derek and Erica started stumbling over their words. "I don't believe this." With one swift motion, I handed them the DNA results. "Believe it," I said coldly. "Here's the proof." They grabbed the paper from my hand, their eyes scanning the report in disbelief. Morgan looked from Derek to Erica, clearly confused by what was happening, while Erica's face twisted with horror. "Morgan," I said, my voice steady, "you can let your mom and Derek know that divorce papers and an eviction notice will be served next week." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, leaving them to deal with the fallout of the truth I had just dropped on them. Driving back to the apartment, I couldn't stop wondering how long this affair had been going on. Had Erica ever really chosen me? Or was I just part of their twisted game? I felt like a fool. Derek had been mocking me behind my back for years, even making jokes to my face, and I had let it all happen. Back at my apartment, I drowned my thoughts in a few beers, trying to numb the bitter sting of betrayal. The next morning, I visited my lawyer to get the ball rolling on the divorce. I knew I'd have to sell the house and split the proceeds, but I was relieved knowing I likely wouldn't have to pay alimony or child support, especially for a child that wasn't even mine. By the end of the month, Erica had hired a lawyer. I had no idea how she could afford one, maybe pro bono or maybe Derek was footing the bill. Either way, they were in for a shock. Despite their attempts to dig into my finances and the sale of the business, they found nothing. I had made sure my assets were clean and well protected. While I was away, I found out through my colleagues that Derek had been hanging around the dealership nearly every day for the first 2 weeks, hoping Lindsay would give him more work. But she didn't budge. She kept turning him down, firm in her decision. Eventually, he gave up. I imagined he regretted not getting his ASE certification, which might have opened up better opportunities for him. Now, he was stuck doing oil changes at Valvoline for a measly $13 an hour. I couldn't help but wonder how he and Erica would manage. She'd probably have to pick up more shifts, or else they'd struggle to make ends meet. I reached out to a realtor and informed Erica that I was putting the house up for sale. I expected the assets to be split evenly, but I knew she'd fight tooth and nail to hang on to whatever she could. Since she'd already received the eviction notice, I figured she'd be out before the sale went through. The thought of them scrambling to find a place to live left me with a sense of grim satisfaction. One evening, there was a knock on my apartment door. To my surprise, it was Erica. Reluctantly, I let her in, curious about what she wanted this time. "Brandon, can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than I'd heard in a long while. "I don't think that's a good idea. We're in the middle of a legal battle," I replied, my defenses already up. "Please, Brandon," she pleaded. "Just us, no lawyers. Can't we talk like normal people for once?" I sighed, not wanting to escalate things further. "Fine, but let's go to Denny's. I'd prefer to keep this in public." At the diner, after a few minutes of pointless small talk, I cut straight to the heart of it. Why Erica? Why Derek? Why the affair? Why lie to me for all these years? I kept my voice steady, but the pain simmered just beneath the surface. She hesitated, stirring her coffee as if the answer were at the bottom of her cup. "The truth is, I couldn't decide between the two of you. I liked you both." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by her bluntness. "So, you were with both of us at the same time?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, but Derek told me to keep it from you. He knew it would ruin everything between us." A fresh wave of betrayal swept over me. Then why did you say yes when I asked you to marry me? I leaned in, desperate to make sense of it all. Erica's voice softened even more. I did love you, Brandon. But I loved Derek too. I knew he wouldn't make a good husband, though. When you proposed, I thought that was my chance to end things with him for good. I tried to focus on you and the wedding. But you slept with him on our wedding day, I said, my voice growing colder. Her guilt was written all over her face as she whispered, Yes, I know it was wrong. Everything was such a mess. I didn't want to let him go, and he didn't want to let me go either. I took a deep breath, struggling to control the anger bubbling up inside. So you married me, knowing you were still involved with him? Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. I thought I could make it work, Brandon. I thought I could let him go after we were married. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. Now you have him, and your child too. Nice choice of name, by the way. I didn't even notice until later. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know Morgan wasn't yours. I didn't know until you told me. I stared at her, the weight of everything crashing down on me. It's nice to hear you still claim to love me, Erica, but I don't think you even understand what love is. I loved you completely, but it's clear now you couldn't say the same. I did love you, Brandon, she insisted, her voice breaking. I still do. I shook my head. I loved you once, but now, I feel nothing but contempt. Erica seemed to realize that this was the end. There was no saving what we had. But before she left, I had one last question gnawing at me. Did you ever stop seeing him? I asked, though I already knew the answer in my gut. She hesitated for a moment before finally coming clean. No, we never really stopped. There were quiet periods, but we still saw each other about twice a month. My hands clenched under the table. I had hoped for a different answer, but at least she was being honest now. I appreciate the truth. One more thing, about a year ago you started acting differently toward me. What changed? Her face flushed and then she grew defensive. Derek started pushing for something else. What do you mean by something else? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. Erica took a deep breath. He wanted a threesome, but without you involved. I might have considered it if you were included, but he made it clear you weren't. It made me resent you, even though it wasn't your fault. I knew you'd never go for something like that. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. Did you go through with it? She replied she did not, shaking her head. I thought about it. But then you left, and everything just fell apart. Well, now you're free to make whatever choices you want, I said, my voice cold and distant. None of it affects me anymore. The conversation had run its course, so I signaled for the check. We walked out to our cars, exchanging brief and meaningless goodbyes. For months later, we stood before the judge as our divorce was finalized. Derek showed up, of course. As we left the courthouse, Erica turned to me and said, Maybe we could grab a drink sometime, just to catch up. Sure, I said, though I had no real interest in following through. The bitterness had faded now that the legal mess was over, but I had no intention of rekindling anything with her. As I drove away, I thought to myself, this is it, the end of any connection I have with them. Now they can be together and deal with their own problems. They deserved each other. But as I merged onto the highway, a small, bitter thought lingered. Erica was about to experience a much lower standard of living, and that brought me some satisfaction. I guess I wasn't completely over the resentment after all.